Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. This is producer JL coming at you by myself here as we wind down towards the end of the summer and slowly begin our descent into what we call the fall season, aka hockey. Whew! Wow, it's been an interesting summer. We've had a couple of pretty interesting moves, pretty interesting discussions. Nothing really has happened, but in terms of Rangers moves, but I think we kind of knew at this point that after the initial flurry of Taylor Radish and Vlad Gavrikov and others, that that would be it. Um, and we'll touch on that a little more because this is going to be primarily a question and answer mailbag episode here today on Live from the Blue Seats. Robin Day versus on vacation. I anticipate at least the second, not next week, but the following week, the week after Labor Day, that they'll both be back and get in the swing of things. And hopefully by then we'll be able to have more stuff for you to talk about. But right now, we're just focusing on your questions. Um, this is always a very interesting time of the year. I think the Olympic camps are together right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anyone is listening to this, so that's going on. Also, Adam Fox apparently he is on this incredible workout regimen from what I heard from the Spit and Chicklets podcast that he's looking to really try and up his game now. Before I get into the questions, I just want to touch on this real quick. The hate that man gets online is absolutely absurd. Why are we hating on Adam Fox? Why? First and foremost, even through all of the crap that this team has gone through over the last couple of years, he's been one of the, if only the consistent thing that this team has been able to, have on their side. It doesn't matter what happens or who he even plays with. Adam Fox has been nothing but the consistent, strong figure, strong number one defenseman that the Rangers and this team needs and is, needed and is needing right now. So I don't understand why the hate. And this is the thing that annoys me. So the report, well, at least the story from Spit and Chicklets, and I can't remember where they heard it from, but apparently they were told that Adam Fox has been nothing but like a demon in the workout room trying to really up his game. And look, that's definitely understandable coming from Fox himself, that he wants to kind of change certain things, because you have to factor in the fact that he's been injured with some pretty serious leg injuries over the last 2 seasons, and it's really hampered his ability to kind of move the puck around a little bit. Whether it's Nicholas Jensen or that moron Sebastian Aho. Yeah, I call them moron. Big deal. So, um, you know, it's good to see that he's really beginning to, kind of work his way past that, because uh if you can get yourself Adam Fox from when he came up, and look, I'm not even going to say, I'm going to take that back. I can't say, oh, we're going to get the same Adam Fox that we got when he came up. He was a little more mobile, but you can kind of definitely tell over the last couple of years that he's been hindered a little bit uh, by the knee issues that he's had. But even in that aspect, he's still been arguably the best defenseman this team has had. So if you're going to get a Fox that is going to be on a different level, that's a plus. Now, I know that Cale Makar is, one of the flashier defensemen in the league. And, excuse me, you know what? Good for him. I like Cale Makar. I like Cale Makar a lot. Cale Makar is my keeper in my fantasy league, in the fantasy hockey league that I'm in. But two-time winner, by the way. Um, so I actually made it to my hockey finals in the hockey league. I made it to the final 3 seasons in a row, and I've won 2 of them. I could have had a three-peat if it weren't for Russell beating me in the middle season of the 3, and I'm hoping to make it a four-time final 4-time final, me getting there and maybe getting a third championship. But Cale Makar is my keeper, and Yeah, he's a good defenseman. He's fast. He's got the great shot. He's very mobile. He's smart with the puck. Um, but if you kind of put two and two together, even though Makar has the speed and he gets to play with Nathan McKinnon, Adam Fox is honestly the better overall defenseman, truth be told. Now, Makar is little bit more flashy, and I think there's some advanced stats to kind of back that up. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I apologize. But I know the argument's out there, and this is not me dunking on Cale Makar, by the way. He definitely does a lot of things better than Adam Fox, in many aspects. But I think overall, just as like an overall player, I think Adam Fox is a more well-rounded defenseman. And I think the numbers were that, if I'm remembering correctly, Adam Fox has, first of all, he made Carson Soucy a competent defenseman. And I know Dave likes to call him Carson Saucy. But if all things considered, Carson Soucy might actually have himself a role on this team if Adam Fox can continue to elevate Soucy to that level. I mean, I think they had like a 53% like XGF or something like that, which I'm totally butchering the stat, I'm assuming. Maybe I should have looked this up, but basically the point is that Adam Fox makes all his players better, and Cale Makar. This I can definitely tell you that without Nathan McKinnon on the ice, Cale Makar is not as effective, which I mean, is bound to happen. But there's a bit more of a drop off, and Fox seems to be the better, well-rounded defenseman when he actually has less than Makar. But this is not to knock the both of them. They're like basically 1A, 1B, pretty much. They're basically the two best defensemen in the league. And look, I know people say Victor Hedman, Roman Yossi, fine. Those are, Charlie McAvoy, they're all elite defensemen in their own right. But if I had to pick one and two, it's definitely Makar and Adam Fox. So Adam Fox amping up to become a lot better than what, physically than he was before. I mean, that's huge because if he's going to be better than he was in the condition that he was in with the stuff that he was dealing with, then that's a huge boon for this team. With the revamped defense, with the different system that Sullivan's going to employ. I definitely think that we're going to see a huge season from Adam Fox. And I'll say this before we get into the questions. The one thing I used to remember about Adam Fox is he was always a bit shifty. He hasn't been as shifty as he's moving around with the puck a little bit, like he was in his first 2 years. Obviously, he won the Norris Trophy around that time. Obviously, he was still really good. Had a phenomenal season last year with his limited mobility. So you can just only imagine what we could potentially get. And I just never understood the narrative why everybody hates him. Why? Why does everybody hate on Adam Fox? Because he's not as flashy as Cale Makar? Who the heck? What the heck? I don't understand it. I really don't. Um, Both are good defensemen. They're different styles of defense that they employ. Adam Fox is more measured. He's more of a passer. He sets things up. I mean, he has the ability to, be shifty. He's a decent skater. And Kel McCarr's, he uses his speed and his offense to play defense. And it's it's basically how Eric Carlson made his living all these years. So it's you can't really compare the two. They're both same but different. But I just never understood whenever it comes to like ranking the best defenseman in the NHL, why Adam Fox isn't any higher than 10 sometimes. Or why must we continue to glaze over Cale Makar when Adam Fox clearly has better underlying numbers than Makar? But yet, every time that there's a Norris Trophy discussion or rage bait or whatever, Adam Fox is never included. It's always either Roman Yossi, Charlie McAvoy, Cale Makar, and Victor Hedman. It's like, what else does Fox have to do? I mean, yeah, granted, this is coming off of the fact that he does have a Norris Trophy, um, but at the same time, I don't understand. My guess it's just because he's not as flashy as Makar. But you just watch the Rangers and watch him skate and play on the ice. You know for a fact the team is going to be 1,000 times better with him on the ice. So I don't get it. So, anyways, all right. So, we've got questions, and thank you to everyone who was able to submit. Some of these are mostly on the blog. If you are on Blue Sky and if you are on Twitter, please feel free to send them over. If you're on those platforms, if you can't reach the blog, feel free to use those platforms to submit your questions. We put out a post for every time we record to ask for questions, and we want to hear what you have to ask us. And continue to send them on the blog. Continue to send them through whichever, and we'll read your questions. But right now, these are primarily going to be on the blog. And so some of these gives me an opportunity to kind of touch on some things. So I'm going to start at the bottom. This comes from Captain Jack. First of all, thank you, Captain Jack, for your questions, and also thank you very much for talking about the Mets, because there's never an opportunity. There's always gonna if there's an opportunity for me to talk about the Mets, I will talk about the Mets. Um, so first part of this question is, so there, buddy. This is from Captain Jack. What do you think of Nolan McLean so far? Oh, geez. I mean, you're you're that's my reaction. It's like, wow. I was just so damn impressed with this kid and the moxie that he has, not only just with his overall, presence on the mound, but just the fact that this guy's pitches, not only his fastball, but his changeup and his sweeper, are some of the nastiest pitches that you can possibly see come off of a pitcher's hand. And I think he is the future ace of this team. Now, I'm recording this on August 29th, so it'll be released the same day, and I will be at Citi Field to watch Jonah Tong pitch. And Jonah Tong is another up-and-coming, quick rising prospect. I think he was either like A or Double A last year, and tore up Double A this year, and made 2 starts in Triple A, automatically gets called up to the major leagues. He might even have better stuff than McLean, and that says a lot. So hopefully he can utilize it. But my what do I think of Nolan McLean? I think he's our ace. If you look and take a look at this the next time you watch him pitch, Captain Jack, and every other Met fan who's listening to this, look at his motion when he's pitching on the mound. It is very similar to one of Jacob deGrom. It's a very similar style, even to granted, when Jake would set on the mound when he was pitching in the windup, he would hold the glove in front of his face for an extended period of time. But McLean doesn't do that. It's a very quick pump up, and then he begins his motion. But if you look at just the way their body position is, arm angle, the way that they drop down and release the baseball, very similar to what DeGrom does when he's at the plate. So the next question that Captain Jack asks is, one, if a star player on another team became available, which of the younger Rangers prospects would you be quicker to trade away, and why? Well, this is definitely a multifaceted question, because it all depends on which type of star becomes available. So obviously this is not going to happen, because these guys are either going to get signed by their teams, or they're not going to, most of the time that the players that are going to be available in question are, at least that I'll mention, are going to probably hit the market. So in the case of, let's say, you know, if if the Oilers somehow managed to want to, cut salary, and the Oilers wanted to trade McDavid, I'm 100% sending Alexi Lafreniere over there, 100%, and probably throwing in Hoffman in that deal with a first-round pick. Obviously, it's not going to be enough. Obviously, the Rangers would have to really load that up in order to get McDavid, because Edmonton's going to really want bang for their buck. But at least for McDavid, and possibly even Eichel, Lafreniere, Othman, and maybe like Berard, and then just those guys would probably end up going the other way. Also, if it's McDavid, then Gabe Perreault is probably going to have to go. And you hate to say that, but Edmonton would definitely probably ask for Perreault. And same thing with probably Eichel too, but I think it's more likely it would be for McDavid than it would be for Eichel. It's tough, because it what fits the Rangers in terms of star players becoming available would vary in different degrees of type of players. So, like, obviously the base would be Othman, Berard, probably Lafreniere, because Lafreniere would be the established young NHL player. Lafreniere is like, what, 23, 24 years old. He's still a kid. So in the case of, like, maybe Kirill Kaprizov, which I think would be great for this team. Um, you know, I'm thinking Jason Robertson from Dallas. That's another potential deal that you would probably have to send over Lafreniere, or Berard or Othman. I don't think Perreault goes in a Robertson deal. But that's just my thoughts. So it would probably be a mix between finding a way to do what would be the good value for either Lafreniere, Othman, or Berard. Obviously, I don't want that to happen. in terms of trying to get rid of either Perot, Lafreniere, Berard, or Othman, unless it's like a can't miss trade. If you're telling me you're going to want Gabe Perot, Brendan Othman, Alexi Lafreniere, and Brett Berard, I'm driving them all to LaGuardia Airport myself. Or if there's somewhere else, I'm going to drive them to Newark. So that's just my guess. That it's a good question. If I would ask Captain Jack, if you want to do this, ask that same question again sometime as the season progresses, because then I think we would probably get somewhat of a better idea of what the team has. And then, we'd also have to see what the team would need in that sense. So it would be easier to narrow down what kind of superstar could potentially become available. Because then if another star player on a team, let's say like a McDavid or even like a Matthew Tkachuk or whomever becomes available, and we kind of know what we're getting with some of these players, then it's easier to make a determination in that sense. This is also why I'm not a scout or a GM, because I should be able to make that decision without really having to rely on going through a season because of all the data these teams harvest on players. But anyways, so there's that. So this question comes from AV Sucks. I agree. And it says, is McJesus going to be a Ranger? Well, first of all, thank you for the question. Secondly, if you don't know who that is, he's clearly talking about Connor McDavid, just for anyone who didn't catch the reference. It's tough. It's not as easy of a question to think about than most people would think, because the NHL, unfortunately, is not as exciting as like Major League Baseball or the NFL or even the NBA is. So you don't really get a lot of those like big groundbreaking players moving to other teams, and when it does, it's quite a surprise actually, you know. Um so like for example, like LeBron James is going around different places. He went to Miami, he went to the Lakers. He went back to Cleveland at one point. So you don't really see that much in the NHL. So what my ideal scenario is that Connor McDavid wants the bag and resign and signs with the Rangers. And I think the Rangers will be willing to make it happen for however they can. Obviously, that would mean probably letting Panarin walk, which, I mean, if you're going to tell me I'm going to kind of look solely, and I have to always preface this when I talk about Panarin these days, solely as a hockey player. Panarin was my favorite because he embodied something that the team had not had in a long time. I'm not going to talk about his off-field stuff. I'm only speaking strictly hockey. Panarin is one of my favorites as a hockey player, right? And but if you're going to tell me that Connor McDavid is available and you're going to let a guy who's making 11 million, basically almost at the twilight of his career, and you're going to sign a guy who for maybe 4 more million than what you're paying Panarin, with the cap going up, 100% I'm doing that. Now, here's the thing, though, with the fact that the NHL is not as, at least the players in the NHL are not as creative in terms of wanting to move and go different places. Uh, he could just sign some 5-year deal for a similar amount of money that he's currently getting, because I think McDavid, if I'm remembering correctly, is probably making close to 12 to 13 million. So this reminds me a lot of when Steven Stamkos was available. He was going to be the biggest, I think it was like 2014, 2015, around that time, maybe earlier. Around that time, like 2013 to like 2015, I can't remember the exact time frame to pin it down. Maybe it was even before that. That the rumor is that Stamkos was going to go to Toronto, and that would have been like this huge big thing. And obviously the Rangers have been linked to Steven Stamkos into game into the league, so that was the thing. But he obviously ended up, right before the free agency period, ended up going to staying with Tampa Bay. Obviously now he's with Nashville, but so there's that. So is he going to be a Ranger? I'm going to put at least maybe 65% he will be, because it all depends on the players don't really make their motivations known, right? And I know that there was some comments that McDavid had made towards the end of the season, at least at the end of the playoffs, that kind of hinted at that he may leave, but could that just be posturing and force Edmonton to kind of offer him a sweetheart deal? Because truth be told, if you're Edmonton and you're actually putting together a solid team for your superstar. Granted, they're not the greatest team, but they're a very good hockey team. That's a spam call. I don't know why I didn't turn this off. Um, Edmonton's a very good hockey team, very potent offensive team. Chris Knobloch and upper management had, at least before Stan Bowman came in, they did a really good job at creating this sort of you know this team that can score. Obviously, it's really reliant on Draisaitl and McDavid, but they've been making it to the playoffs after so long of having McDavid and them just suffering in the doldrums of just being out west. So it all depends on whether he wants to carry that on with Edmonton and then be comfortable up there, or he wants to take on the new challenge like Messier did when he left Edmonton and come to New York and bring a Stanley Cup winner. Now, the difference between Messier and McDavid is that Messier had a bunch of cups and McDavid doesn't. So that kind of, I guess, made the decision easier for Messier to come to New York. So I think it's probably at 65%. I was a little bit more sure of it last season, but with the fact that there was some mention of contract negotiations and the fact that I don't really know exactly what the Rangers are trying to do at this point, especially with Sullivan coming at the helm, I can't fully guarantee, but I think it's more likely to happen than not. And if any Edmonton fan hears this, and then when he ultimately probably ends up resigning and wants to clip this, by all means, I'm not going to feel guilty about it because hockey is a very volatile sport in the sense that things just change, from one thing to another in a split second. All right, so this next question comes from Two Line Passes. And I'm surprised that there's no crazy question from you, Two Line Passes. I'm not disappointed, but hopefully your creative mind can throw me a curveball next time around. But I do like these questions, though. They're actually very good. So thank you, Two Line Passes, for these questions. So Two Line Passes asks, what is your prediction for who becomes Sully's first go-to guy? I think it's going to be JT Miller. And probably Vincent Trocheck. I know that's two people, but I think it'll probably be JT Miller. Just going off of the way that he talked about, the four Rangers that he had on the Four Nations team. Obviously, they had Fox, they had Kreider, Miller, and Trocheck. So I think forward wise, it'll be Miller, and defense wise, it'll be Adam Fox. Because I think that there's some familiarity. American hockey players and American coaches tend to have this very similar sort of this connection because they all intertwine at some point. It's very similar to how the Canadian national team and the junior teams operate. There's some familiarity amongst each other. So the way that Miller's style fits is more in line with what Sullivan wants, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say Sidney Crosby light, because Miller is definitely not at the level of Sidney Crosby, but like there's similar traits that Miller has that is not up to the level of Crosby, but very similar in terms of leadership, in terms of skill. They can both do a lot. Like JT Miller's no slouch. Like he's a phenomenal player, first line center kind of thing. And who you think will be in the doghouse? Now, this is a tough one because there could be a lot of ones that can really hit this. So, you don't want to say Lafreniere until he actually plays because we've seen how Lafreniere does with change, and more than likely he does very well with it. But if I had to pick someone who would be in the doghouse, it would probably be Brennan Othman. And I don't want to sound like I'm trashing the kid, but until I see Othman kind of adding a little bit more, and I hope we will, and I hope he does more, on ice, scoring in this net in the fourth. Obviously, he needs the opportunity. I feel like, and then maybe Husso Parssinen at one point because Sullivan might want to go with more of the right-handed shot at center. I don't know. That's a bit tougher than the go-to guy because it's easier to see what the good can be used for instead of the bad. That's just me though. Maybe they can be, maybe there is a legitimate answer to that question. I tried to answer that as the best that I could, but thank you for that. And then your final question, Two Line Passes, is: do you think that Zibanejad will find another spiffy handshake partner? Well, he already has one in Vincent Trocheck. They did the thing with the finger, right? Um, and it'll probably be Trocheck. That's just the assumption I'm making. It'll probably be Trocheck. But then you got, Miller and Trocheck with their bromance and whatever. But it'll probably be someone who was on the team. Maybe Lafreniere. But yeah, no, we're gonna. That's the one thing I didn't even realize that we're gonna miss those post-game win handshakes with Kreider and Zibanejad. I didn't really think much of it until now, just kind of putting it in perspective. So that's definitely going to be something that's going to be missed. Well, thank you to Line Passes for those questions. I appreciate it. We here at the blog appreciate it because it allows us to, kind of talk about some things that we, may not have really thought about. All right, this next question comes from No Cup. And the first one is, besides signing Gavrikov, what has Drury really done this offseason to make this a better, more rounded and competitive team? Well, outside of that, it's Mike Sullivan. Um, you know, he signed Taylor Radish for, this sort of bottom six role, but this is the time where they need to see what they finally have in the kids, whether it's Othman, Berard, Cooley. This is the time to do it because you can only kick the cans farther down so much by acquiring other types of players and veterans and all that. But it's not going to, like the Florida Panthers model, you have to really be on top of that. Bill Zito is on top of it. That's why that works, that they can just bring in any Tom, Dick, and Harry to come in and play on a bottom six line. You have Barkov and Tkachuk as your skill guys with, a bunch of other extra tertiary but skilled players as well. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to constantly bring people in that can fit the style that they're looking for. The Rangers don't have that luxury. And it's hard. It's crazy to say that when you have, and this is the thing that we do as fans for our own team is that we criticize them. And I'm certainly at fault of this. I'm not one to, look at myself because I do this all the time, especially with the Mets, you know. Um, is that this team has a lot of talent, but we tend to be a little bit harsher on them. Therefore, we don't think of them as good. And again, this plays into the whole Adam Fox thing that I was talking about. We don't see them as good as we want them to be because when you're not, you see, it's different when, even though we have access to all of this video and information these days. It was a lot different back in the day when all you really had was Sports Center. But you have so much access to different types of players on other teams. You can see it more, but even in that sense, you're only still seeing highlights. I guarantee you a lot of Ranger fans are not sitting down and watching full Edmonton Oilers games unless it's the playoffs or unless they're playing a rival. And that's just the nature of sports. You can only follow really one team at a time. For most people, I know other people follow different teams, and that's perfectly fine. But for the most part, you're really, if for Ranger fans or just generally of a fan, just regular fans of teams are really paying attention to one team. So you see a lot more of the mess ups that you wouldn't necessarily see another player make. So I think right now, uh, Drury didn't really need to do much because it wasn't warranted, right? You want to make sure that you really want to see what you have in Brennan Othman. You really want to see what you have in Will Cooley. You really want to see what you have in Gabe Perreault down the line, and you have to give Alexi Lafreniere a shot, because you can only get guys to take those spots for so long and have these young kids just waddle away on the third and fourth line in the press box, and then you get nothing out of them. And then when you trade them, they end up performing a lot better. And you say, oh my gosh, how come they didn't do that here? Well, to be fair, outside of, certain spots, they didn't get the opportunity that they needed. So this is the optimal opportunity for these kids to show what they got. They're not winning the cup this year. If they do, please surprise me. I want it to happen. But conventional wisdom, just off of the way things have gone, they're not going to win the cup. Could they make the playoffs? Absolutely. But there's a lot of hurdles that they need to face. Could they do it? 100% they could. And I believe in them that they can do it. And if they make the playoffs, I want them to win the cup. But if I had to speak realistically, I don't think they're going to win the cup this year. At the same time, though, you have to see. So if in that case, which I'm sure Chris Drury knows, I'm not to say that he's going to speak down on his team, but he knows that he needs more. And I think you need to see what you have first. So, the minimal signings that he's done and the minimal moves that he's made is actually a good thing. And you know, I'm not yelling, by the way. Just so besides signing Gavrikov, he hasn't really done much, but that's okay. That's okay because ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to see what you have in these kids, and if they end up turning out to be good, then there's the extra answer to that. What did he do? He didn't do anything to allow these kids to flourish. Second question is, who did Drury acquire to make up for the 30 or so goals that Kreider usually scores? That role is going to go on Will Cooley. And I think on last week's podcast, we talked about um, Dan Rosen's article, the three questions facing the Rangers, which it's great, great summer piece if you want to read it, but some insight on like Spanajad and Will Cooley and all that. But Will Cooley is seen, and Sullivan made a point that even though they're not the same player, they do have very similar skill sets on certain things. And I think if Cooley is going to play up with on the top six, which he 100% should, then it's like I said last week, is that Kreider wasn't as tough and gritty as Cooley is. So I think Cooley will make up for what he's lacking in comparison to Kreider with his toughness and his grit, because then from there, he can score goals in other ways. And hopefully you'd want him to become the deflector guy in front of the net, you know. Um, that's one thing that I hope that they at least try to have him do similar to Kreider, because that would be great in terms of working on the power play and whatnot. So I think it's not even acquiring someone. I think they're just going to use Will Cooley to try and replicate that production for Kreider. And then the last question is, who has Drury brought in that will help make the team harder to play against and add much missing grit to the lineup? Um, so there's kind of a multitude of factors to that question. So it's being harder to play against. It's it, it, it it's Sullivan, really, and it's the system that he employs. You look at when Paul Maurice became the coach of the Panthers, right? And they made the trade for Matthew Tkachuk. You know, they changed the system of the way that the team played hockey, and it immediately paid dividends in terms of being a difficult team to play against. Also, Alexander Barkov is just a menace, right? So a lot of people, and I'm not saying you, that's just me making a general statement because I know that people have made this online in terms of this topic. It's not always just about being big. It's about the play style. The Rangers have guys that can do that. And if you've noticed the way that Chris Drury has drafted, he's leaning towards getting young players who can play that style of hockey. Adam Sikora, Will Cooley, Brennan Othman, just, Brett Berard. Those guys are players that teams and other players will have a tough time playing against. And we've seen a little bit of it over the last 2 years. So I think ultimately, who has Drury brought in that will help make the team hard to play against and add much mission grit to the lineup? It's Mike Sullivan, the coach, because the system will dictate what the players will have to do. And then once we see it in action, then you can figure out who is going to fit the system and who is not going to fit the system. Now, this might be surprising to many people. Mika Zibanejad could be one of those players. And I say that because he's still a very good hockey player. He's a very smart defensive player. And you pair him with JT Miller, that can make that can make things hard for people. It really can. We've seen it happen before. The year that they won the President's Trophy, they were a very difficult team to play against. And Mika Zibanejad, granted, wasn't scoring as much as he was before, was still a very difficult center to play against. And for the majority of that Florida Panthers series, yeah, Barkov had a couple of things here and there, but he held up his own pretty well against Barkov, all things considered. It's just Barkov has a little bit more high-end skill and can, put it into the back of the net. But Mika held him pretty seamlessly. Mika does well against Connor McDavid when he's out there. But at the same time, though, with Zibanejad's role shifting, you kind of want to steer him away from that to kind of get more offensive, production out of him, because that's ultimately what you're paying him for. So yeah, I think that to the answer to the third question, it's Mike Sullivan. It just all, and then it all depends on who fits the system, how it's what they do when it's implemented, and then going from there, you can begin to really make that determination. And also, let's not forget, Alexis Lafreniere has the build for this type of system. He has the build and the skill for it. So I think that's another one who can really fit that. So it's not primarily just about who they brought in. Also, let's not forget, that fourth line of Carrick, Edstrom, and Rempe is a pain for players to play against, and that's where a lot of your battles are won. And I think they're going to play a big part on this team too. So thank you, No Cup, for those questions. Please continue to ask. Please continue to submit questions. We love answering them here, and that goes to everybody too. Please continue to submit these. We love answering these questions. So this next question comes from NYC Crash. Um, okay, so we got 2 joke questions and 2 real questions. Okay, I will answer the 2 joke questions because I think I had a conversation with someone about something like this the other day. So the first question is, if you're invisible, can you see yourself? No. If you watch The Boys, there was a character who was invisible. You can't see yourself. That would just be weird if you could. And 2, if animals could talk, which one would be the rudest? Obviously, cats. I mean, come on. you know, my ex-girlfriend had 2 cats that, I would go hang out with, and they were some of the rudest SLBs you could find. Incredibly adorable, but very moody too, you know. Now let's go to thank you for those, by the way. I like those questions. Um, but then he says, in all seriousness, you have 2 real questions. So the first question he asks is, which team this year do you think will be making a major blockbuster trade? With which players to what team? That's a great question. Um, I think, me personally, if it's not the Rangers, because I think the Rangers need a similar, you could argue JT Miller was that trade, but the Rangers could really benefit from like a similar Matthew Tkachuk kind of trade. Uh, I don't want to say Brady with Ottawa, but I feel like there could be some sort of parallel there where that could potentially be something that they can do. But obviously Alexis Lafreniere would end up going the other way, because if you look at the comp of when Tkachuk got traded, Matthew, Jonathan Huberdeau was essentially Alexis Lafreniere's comp. And he's doing reasonably well in Calgary. So, but I think the Rangers would want to prefer to keep Lafreniere. So I think it's going to probably either be uh, I think it'll probably end up being Toronto, because they're probably going to want to clear some cap. They just re-signed John Tavares, and they let go Mitch Marner. You still have Austin Matthews and Willie Nylander, and if they can't really show up the defense and maybe goaltending, then they're a candidate for that. The Dallas Stars are another candidate for this type of trade. Um, Probably involving Jason Robertson at some point. There were rumors that they were trying to move him. Dallas is very close to the cap. Matt Duchene is a candidate to get moved because of his contract. Rope Hintz could potentially be moved if they are trying to get rid of him. Miro Heiskanen could potentially be on the move, depending on what Dallas wants to do, even though Dallas is a very hard team to play against. And I think ultimately Edmonton could end up being this type of team to do that if they end up losing McDavid. Um, I can't really pick the players, because especially at this point, because it's hard to tell without the season starting. The Tkachuk trade happened in the offseason, so it would have already have happened by now. So it's a bit more difficult to kind of get a read on players. But probably if it's not the Rangers are definitely would benefit from something like that. But it'll probably either be Toronto, Dallas, Edmonton. Um, and honestly, Florida might be added again, because if they see that obviously they're the defending champions, but if they're seeing that they can get an asset for something that they can flip for some chunk of change, and they really trust the management to fill the spots that they vacated, then they could be a candidate for that. They actually were in preparation for it in terms of filling a role when they traded for Seth Jones. And everybody thought, why the hell is Florida trading for Seth Jones for? Like, why? And it was ultimately insurance if Aaron Ekblad left, and it seemed like he was going to go to somewhere else, but he ended up resigning, which totally good for him. It would all seem like a foregone conclusion he was going to leave, but they ultimately ended up becoming a little bit richer in that aspect, where they got to keep both guys. And then the second question that you ask, Crash, is if you were going to trade Panarin, Where would you send him that would give him a best chance to win a cup, and what would you want in return? I have a and then you asked, and you say that you have a feeling that if they move him, it will be a three-way deal to Florida to play with Bob so they can run for a cup together. Florida is definitely an option, depending on how much they want to, depending on how much money is retained, how much they want to pay. What would the Rangers get in return for that missing production? Because you have to get something in return for Panarin, granted if he's a rental. But I don't think that they'll trade him, but I think it'll probably be between maybe Florida. So I'm using the teams that he was interested in when he was a free agent. So that ultimately boiled down to Colorado, Florida, Chicago, the Rangers, and the Islanders. But the Islanders wasn't as serious as many people thought. But it's definitely an option. So it seems like it would probably be a mix of those teams if they decide to trade him. And I think the Florida one is a bit more, you know, shoot, you could even throw Vegas in there if you wanted to, depending on how much money they have and how much the Rangers decide to retain. Tampa Bay could be an option, which would absolutely shatter me because of how many former Rangers went to Tampa Bay, including, one of my favorites, Ryan McDonough. Um, Tampa Bay could possibly be, a potential deal, depending on what they give us in return, because, you put up with Kucherov, Kucherov and Panarin, forget it. But again, I don't have Cap Friendly up right now. Or is it Cap Friendly? Cap Geek, I forget the name of the new website. It might be Cap Friendly. Uh, but the new caps, I don't have the cap numbers in front of me, but it just that Colorado might be an option too, because they have some players potentially the Rangers could try and use, even though they did trade Callan Foote away. If I'm thinking that that's the right prospect, that would have been really good. Uh, but yeah, Colorado could be an option for Panarin, Florida, Tampa Bay. Um, but then as the season goes along, we'll have to see more of what could potentially come together. Honestly, and I'm going to say this here, I think they either let him walk or they re-sign him for a cheaper deal. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think they'll trade him, but if they did, I think it'll be. And another team is Dallas. Um, I think Dallas would use his services very well. I know they're up against the cap, so obviously another big contract would have to come back the other way. Uh, Maybe in order to relieve some cap from them, Duchesne or Robertson come back to New York. I know the Rangers have been kicking the tires on Jason Robertson. If that's the opportunity to get rid of a depreciating asset, and all while getting something that could potentially be his replacement, or it will be his replacement, and keep him on this team, you do it. So that's just my thought on that. So thank you, NYC Crash, for those 4 questions. I appreciate it. We appreciate it here. And this last one comes from Blue Shirts, and they ask, "What plus Panarin or Mika do we have to offer to land Connor McDavid?" So it's like I said earlier, I don't think he's going to get traded. If he does, it'll be a haul, definitely. He's more than likely going to either hit the market or re-sign for some ridiculous contract with Edmonton to stay there. But if you had to offer something for that, if the opportunity presented itself, because you never know, obviously Panarin would be part of the trade. Lafreniere would be a part of the trade. Gabe Perreault would probably be part of the trade, and Brennan Othman would probably be part of the trade, because I think what the only comp that I can honestly think of this is the Gretzky trade. But I think the Rangers would give a little bit more to Edmonton than what was perceived what Gretzky got from LA. you know. Um, so definitely, if it's Panarin, I don't think they'll take Mika, because that's just, if they're really moving McDavid, it's essentially a downgrade. Uh, Obviously Leon Draisaitl would fill up that spot that McDavid would vacate on the first line, at center, but it would probably be Panarin, Lafreniere, Perreault, Othman. So you essentially have to give up basically the first couple of first round draft picks, and then maybe a first round pick and a couple of late round picks, and probably like a lower end prospect to kind of round out the trade. But obviously those trades don't really happen anymore. But then NYC Crash, kind of, you know, uh, alluded to that they're not going to trade him. Edmonton's going for a cup. They signed Chris Knobloch for that reason. that he has that not only familiarity with McDavid, but he's also just a damn good coach. We saw what he did in Hartford, and if it wasn't Mike Sullivan, I kind of wanted, him to kind of take over the team. But yeah, so I think if we had to think of a hypothetical trade for Panarin to go to Edmonton for McDavid, you would have to load up on the young prospects. So, like I said, Lafreniere goes, Perot goes, Othman goes, maybe Berard, but you're essentially depleting a lot of your youth. And maybe you probably throw in a Sikora, maybe if you don't want to trade Berard or whatever. I'm assuming they'll probably ask for Malcolm Spence, you know, uh, in that regard. So it'll be a lot. It Edmonton may be crazy, but they know what they have in him, and I don't think they're just going to, and not to say that I made the assumption from your question that they'll give him away, but trades like that, like I said, rarely ever happen. And I think that, I know NYC Crash mentioned Igor. Um, I don't think that would be the case if Igor would get flipped. I know Edmonton's looking for a goaltender, but you don't really see goalies in big trades like that. Um, usually goalies get traded for other goalies. I mean, you think of the Patrick Waugh trade as a comp. You know, it's Jocelyn Thibault went the other way to Montreal in that deal with Colorado. So, the rain, and then also too, Igor wouldn't go the other way because you still have Jonathan Quick, yeah, but that's only for one season. But then, you have Dylan Garand, who could certainly fill the gap, but we don't know what he have him yet. So it wouldn't be optimal. The Rangers would never do that, considering they just re-signed him to that extension too. So, so yeah. So thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Thank you for all your comments and questions. Just trying to see if there's anything else. No, I think that's pretty much it. No, it's not a long podcast. Figured just come in and chat a little bit about, just some stuff. But yeah, so I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I could possibly mention just in terms of the Rangers. I know that on the website, Dave has been submitting, the 7 thoughts. I think that's a Patreon post. Yes, so that's a Patreon post. If you become a member, you will get that article. Dave does a really good job with a lot of those Patreon posts. And if you are a subscriber to the Patreon, continue to check them out. And if you are not, if you want to, throw a couple bucks his way, our way on the blog, feel free. It's a lot of good content. And that's the one thing I will say. And this isn't a knock on any other publication that I write for, because I do write for a couple. Well, really, it's just Mesmerized. But like Mesmerized, they do a really good job here. Dave does a really good job. All the writers, that we have on staff here do a really good job at putting out stuff. And Dave does a good job in making sure that, he doesn't pressure anybody for content. Is if you feel like you want to write it, by all means. I have a little bit more of a trigger finger when it comes to putting stuff together. So you'll probably see a lot of my stuff on there. But Tyler does a really good job with the recaps. Russell has really good insight. Coach Connell, who, coaches, hockey himself, has really good insight. Will Wright and Hope, do a really good job with prospects, and the farm in Hartford and college and juniors. They have a really good insight on that. Dave, with just his general thoughts, he's putting out report cards for, the players on the team right now. Obviously, I have my, retrospectives and just stuff, and obviously the podcast here, Rob with his thoughts as well, Becky and everyone else. I apologize if I don't name you, Nick and, the rest of our crew. It's probably the most active Rangers content machine. And this is not to knock the other guys, they're in their lane, we're in our lane. And if you are here, whether it's, listening to this podcast, reading our articles, subbing to the Patreon, or even all three, or even just a casual observer, we thank you. And we appreciate the time you put out to sit down and check out our content. So with that being said, I think that's a wrap on today's episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I have to go get ready to go to a Mets game. you know, but we hope that there could be some good news, just any news that comes through the Rangers wire over the next couple of weeks. But we'll definitely be amping up more in terms of just getting stuff together. More stuff's going to come out. Players are going to start reporting back to New York City, going to camp, and we'll hear more from the coaching staff and this, that, and the fourth. And then ultimately at the end of the month, we'll, you know, we'll get some preseason games. I know that I'll be at least one or two. I tend to go to one at the Garden, one at the Prudential Center. Because once the Prudential Center are really cheap. But also, I go to a lot of Ranger games. I am a season ticket member. If you reach out to me and you want to say hello, feel free. Just please don't hurt me. I mean, I am a man, but still, I always like meeting people. I'm a very friendly guy. And yeah, so we've got a lot of hockey coming up, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be a good season. It's going to be a very intense year because if you take a look at the schedule and you'll see what I mean when I say intense. There is not one instance where the Rangers, or at least from what I've seen, any other team having 3 days off until the break, and maybe at least before the break. They're not going to have 3 consecutive days off, even when they're traveling. It's on the most as I saw was only really 2. I could be wrong before the Olympic break, but hockey seasons with the Olympic break are so much fun because you get hockey condensed into so much time, and it's great. And it's cool too because if you're a follower of baseball like I am, you're used to, it's always weird when the baseball season ends because at least for me, and I'm sure there's other people who can understand, is that you're so used to 7:10 p.m. or a 1:10 afternoon game or a 4:10 game on a Saturday or a 1:30 game on a Sunday. There's baseball. And generally speaking, hockey doesn't necessarily have a game every day, and for good reason, of course. But usually there's always kind of like, a gap in between some of the days. So like you could go a whole like 4 days sometimes without having a hockey game. But because of the Olympic break, you're going to have hockey at least every other day. And that is phenomenal. Now, whether or not that'll be an advantage to the Rangers or not when it comes to trying to learn the system that Sullivan's going to employ remains to be seen. But we're in for a lot of content in terms of sports coming up, and there's going to be a whole bunch of things for us to talk about. So I'm really excited. And we thank you for being along for the ride. I want to give my thanks to Dave and the rest of the crew at Blue Seat Blogs for allowing me to espouse my nonsense to you, the listening public. Um, and if anyone who's listening to this works at a sports radio station, feel free to hire me. Anyways, anyways, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for taking the time out to check out our content. I'm producer JL saying have a wonderful day and let's go Rangers.